Based off everybody's favorite review aggregator, which MCU superhero is the most super? Which entry in this sprawling cinematic universe stands above the rest? Well, Marvel fans, assemble, because today we're looking at the best MCU movies according to Rotten Tomatoes. Ant-Man and the Wasp was in the unenviable position of being the immediate follow-up to Infinity War when it hit theaters in July 2018. Marvel fans had been left reeling after Thanos' infamous snap, and were now left with a world where only 50% of their favorite heroes remained. It was the middle of the summer, the height of the blockbuster movie season, and there was only one thing the studio could do to save it: hand the box office reins over to Paul Rudd. The film actually takes place just prior to the events of Infinity War, which keeps it unburdened by the heavy weight of Lost Avengers. It's a welcome break from a story that had delved into some pretty dark MCU territory, and it's exactly where Rudd's Scott Lang shines the brightest. The bulk of Ant-Man and the Wasp's story centers on a rescue mission to bring Janet Van Dyne back from the quantum realm, while trying to fend off the sabotage attempts of a supervillain called Ghost. But there's a good portion of it, along with a main source of comic relief, that comes from Lang's attempts to keep the FBI from discovering he's escaped his Civil War-imposed house arrest, using a giant ant as a decoy. The whole thing is reminiscent of a simpler time for the MCU, a time where the biggest problem a hero had to face was more earthbound and the entire fate of humanity didn't lie in the balance. It's a light, easy film, made all the more enjoyable by Lang's signature snark and the banter between him and, well, everyone he comes in contact with.
Relax, no one's gonna recognize us.
What, because of hats and sunglasses? It's not a disguise, Hank. We look like ourselves at a baseball game.
Mostly, Ant-Man and the Wasp does a great job of showcasing how big of an asset Hope Van Dyne, the Wasp half of this film's dynamic duo, is in the MCU. She proves to be much more than just a sidekick here. She's the glue that keeps this team together. By 2016, we'd seen armies of alien goons, magic space rocks, superheroes, and political intrigue. But what we hadn't yet seen was straight-up ancient mysticism. Neither had Benedict Cumberbatch's Stephen Strange, an arrogant but brilliant surgeon who loses the use of his precious hands in a car accident and travels to an Asian monastery for treatment when his own failed experiments leave him destitute. There, he learns of the sorcerers, led by the Ancient One, who use the mystic arts to protect Earth from all manner of other dimensional threats. It's a solid MCU outing, and we're definitely looking forward to its sequel, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Granted, not everyone counts the movie as one of their all-time favorites, even if they like it, but what can't be denied is that Cumberbatch is simply wonderful in the starring role. He shows up frequently in other MCU movies and is rarely not one of the best things in them. In Ragnarok, he trapped Loki in a falling dimension for several minutes and sent Thor tumbling down the stairs. In Infinity War and Endgame, he was a source of collected reason and leadership when cool heads and battle plans were needed most. And in his own solo film, he wonderfully mixed aristocratic snark with genuine empathy for others, at least by the end of the film anyway.
Breaking the laws of nature, I know. Well, don't stop now.
Is it too much to ask for Strange to show up in every movie? Even if the universe doesn't need him that day, he's always a welcome presence. The MCU has heavily relied on science fiction and fantasy throughout its run, featuring space aliens, time travel, gods, mystical arts, and superpowers. Those flashy elements may seem like crutches for weak or immature storytelling to some viewers, but look no further than 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier for proof that Disney's Marvel films were always capable of diving into the realm of grounded political thrillers without losing any of their edge or appeal. This film can compete with, or arguably surpass, any Jack Reacher, Mission Impossible, or Bourne film when it comes to espionage and intrigue, friendships and betrayals, and the ever-present threat of big government run amok with cash and power. Maybe the movie works because, even though it has phenomenal action choreography and fun performances, it never relies on those things to the point that it loses touch with the character-based themes that always made Captain America such a draw. Namely, what is the nature of patriotism? At what point does patriotism, usually associated with some degree of government obedience, require us to rebel? Perhaps most importantly, to what should we be ultimately loyal? The government or our principles?
I thought I knew whose lies I was telling, but I guess I can't tell the difference anymore.
The answers might seem obvious, but as Winter Soldier shows, doing the right thing isn't always easy. Luckily for us, it's hard to imagine a better man to show us the way than Steve Rogers. As evidenced by its mighty showing on the Tomato Meter, the critics were inspired. On the one hand, the popularity of the MCU following the record-smashing blockbuster that was Avengers Endgame was at an all-time high. On the other hand, it's hard to get people excited about a chapter of a story that takes place after what was, in effect, the climax.
Does anyone even have a plan?
I have a plan.
All of our emotional investment was paid off in Endgame, and it would have been a fine conclusion to the whole franchise, even if certain characters still had some life and fight left in them. But the MCU has never shied away from doing what you're not supposed to be able to do. Far From Home was a funny, heart-pounding good time that taught us a little something about the nature of courage and confidence the way only Tom Holland's Spider-Man can. They also had a winner on their hands with Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio, and they didn't take the obvious approach with him by making him an actual superpowered being. It might seem rather lame to have the hero pull the mask off the baddie at the end, exposing him as a fraud like the Wizard of Oz or any Scooby-Doo villain, but sticking with the comics in which the character is a talented special effects artist worked well here. After all, what is Mysterio if not a miserable fraud with too much time and money on his hands? By 2014, people had come around to the MCU's uncanny ability to popularize characters only die-hard comic fans would have cared about beforehand. But that was severely tested when Marvel announced Guardians of the Galaxy. We had at least heard of Captain America and the Hulk before their movies came out, or had maybe seen the less-than-spectacular films they'd been in before Disney bought the rights. But Guardians of the Galaxy? Star-Lord? Drax? What is that? A talking raccoon whose best friend is a giant tree named Groot? Come on, Marvel.
This is what we get for acting altruistically.
I'm Groot.
They are ungrateful.
But the results don't lie. Guardians wasn't just another breakout hit. When it came out, it was competing with Iron Man or The Avengers for the title of Best MCU Film. It was certainly the funniest, the wackiest, the zaniest, and the most out-there tentpole blockbuster anyone had seen in some time. And all these years later, it still has one of the most beloved and talked about soundtracks ever. Those classic rock hits had been out for decades by the time the movie came out, but now whenever you hear Hooked on a Feeling, you probably picture Chris Pratt dancing in an alien cave, swept away by the music of his troubled childhood on Earth. Sound weird? It is, and that's why we love it. For the people who spent 8 years watching the Marvel Cinematic Universe unfold prior to Captain America: Civil War, the film felt something like watching our parents fight. It's a testament to the fantastic writing, development, and portrayal of the characters that fans were so invested. All of those characters found themselves at odds in the film over a proposed law that would have made the Avengers subordinate to the United Nations. To put it simply, Cap and his friends were against the law, citing the untrustworthiness of government. On the other hand, Tony and his friends were in favor, citing the collateral damage the Avengers had caused over the years and how a lack of accountability may have contributed even if their intentions were pure.
If we can't accept limitations, we're boundaryless, we're no better than the bad guys.
Tony, if someone dies on your watch, you don't give up.
Who said we're giving up?
The thing is, they're both kind of right, and it was both unfair and a little brilliant to ask the fans to choose between them. If there's one criticism we have about this storyline in particular, it's that it didn't end up having long-lasting consequences, since the existential threat posed by Thanos forced everyone to make nice real quick, and it wasn't really readdressed. But for the 2-hour duration, it represented a new, more mature, more thought-provoking era for the MCU between all the shootouts. It was a movie that made you think about what you would do when faced with the reality that your heroics have hurt people. But it also confronted audiences with the truth that some questions demand easy answers that don't actually exist. What if the truth lies somewhere in the middle, between black and white, where nobody can reach? The first few MCU films had all beaten rather low to middling expectations. Money had been made, a successful sequel had proved sustained interest. Fans were impressed. It was no easy feat, but the world looked to move on to the next thing. The MCU wasn't done. They had plans for their hard-developed characters on a scale unprecedented in the history of superhero cinema. We're talking about the team-up movie. The MCU Brain Trust had laid the groundwork in post-credit sequences featuring Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury recruiting our solo supers for something called the Avengers Initiative. And now Marvel had to deliver. To say they did is an understatement. The Avengers, which followed 6 heroes teaming up to stop an alien invasion led by Thor's bitter adopted brother Loki, was an unexpected knockout that grossed $1.5 billion worldwide. The action was great and the set pieces were impressive. But what made it work was the fact that the characters, and the actors portraying them, had tremendous chemistry together, which brought to life director Joss Whedon's sharp script.
What's your thing, Pilates? What? It's like calisthenics. You might have missed a couple things, doing time as a capsicle.
By the time the alien baddies had been beaten and the credits started to roll, things had changed. This team-up movie didn't feel like the end of an interesting little superhero excursion. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something truly game-changing. Reboots are hard to nail, especially when you're trying to breathe new life into a superhero franchise. Take Spider-Man, for example. There had been 2 separate live-action Spideys before 2016, so audiences were understandably wary of a third. However, when Disney dropped a brand new Spider-Man into the MCU by featuring him in Captain America: Civil War, it was unlike any previous live-action Spider-Man before. The response was electric. People who'd groaned at the thought of yet another wall crawler gracing the big screen were suddenly demanding to see more of this Tom Holland kid. They said he was perfect for the role, and they were right. He merged Tobey Maguire's lovable dorkiness and Garfield's sarcastic cool into a Spider-Man truly worthy of the character's massive legacy.
Are you an Avenger?
Yeah, basically.
And 2017's Homecoming, which didn't bother with the classic origin story we all know by heart anyway, proved he could go the distance. It's up there with the best coming-of-age stories in recent memory. And in typical Marvel movie fashion, it refused to let itself be little more than an advertisement for the brand. Yes, Tony Stark is in it, the Avengers are always there, revered by Peter's high school classmates, but this is his movie and he shines. Clearly, the critics agreed. After the somewhat disappointing first 2 Thor movies, which are often considered to be weaker than other MCU outings, it was clear something was off. The fantastical elements obviously weren't the problem, because they loved those same things in Guardians of the Galaxy. It wasn't the action. There was no shortage of great bang-for-your-buck, high-stakes fight scenes in those movies, and it wasn't the villain. Tom Hiddleston's Loki broke out of 2011's So-So Thor to become one of the most enduringly popular characters in the whole franchise. And The Dark World is far from the only Marvel movie with a forgettable baddie. It wasn't the lead either. Chris Hemsworth is good-looking and likable and even funny, when the movies allow him to be. But that's what the first 2 flicks were missing, wasn't it? There were funny moments, but the movies themselves weren't comedies. What if they were? What if, like Guardians of the Galaxy, they simply leaned into the inherent ridiculousness of the God of Thunder and wore it on their sleeves?
I choose to run toward my problems and not away from them.
That's what.
We imagine the conversation went something like that anyway, because Thor: Ragnarok, following the titular character's attempts to get home and save his people from his evil sister and a giant lava monster, is a laugh-a-minute riot that critics fell in love with. And no wonder. Writer-director Taika Waititi is to comedy what Jordan Peele has become to the horror genre, an unstoppable rising star. At the beginning of 2008, Iron Man was a relatively obscure B-list comic book character. Sure, we'd heard of him, the guy in the red and yellow armor, right? But by the end of the year, thanks to a career-defining comeback performance from Robert Downey Jr. as the titular smug billionaire turned mech suit-wearing Defender of the Weak and Innocent, he was nearly a household name. But even that doesn't truly describe the impact this film had, because nobody could have possibly guessed how huge the franchise would become over the course of the approaching decade. The beginnings were rather humble, compared to the all-out cosmic brawl for the universe in Endgame, but if you trace it back to the origins, you'll see it's all there. Great action, great jokes.
Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
A menacing villain in Jeff Bridges' Obadiah Stane. But all those eye-popping explosions and cool fight scenes aside, the focus is, rather simply, on a larger-than-life but flawed character whose decisions drove the drama of the story. In overcoming his own demons, Tony Stark finds the strength to save the world. It's simple, classic stuff that's too often overlooked by so many lesser blockbusters in cinematic universes. Character counts. And when you have a great one, maybe outfitted with a pair of rocket boots, the sky's the limit. Both critics and fans love the film and have rewarded the franchise it launched with oceans of cold, hard cash. Lots of massively popular, big-budget, multi-character franchises concluded in 2019, but Avengers: Endgame did it right. Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker and Game of Thrones both reached their respective finish lines only to leave fans wanting. The Russo brothers knew better. They knew that while action set pieces and special effects are great, or perhaps even essential, depending on the film, they're worthless without a strong, character-driven story. Infinity War gave us reason to hope for a strong conclusion by showing it was possible to give well over a dozen beloved characters enough things to do on screen without forcing it. But Endgame proved it was possible to give those same characters, who we'd spent the last 11 years getting to know like family, a proper conclusion to their respective decade-long arcs.
Then again, that's the hero gig. Part of the journey is the end.
Banner learned to live with and appreciate his demon. Thor learned to accept himself and his failings. Iron Man, who'd we'd met in 2008 as a self-interested playboy, made the ultimate sacrifice to save mankind. Steve Rogers, having done it all day for long enough, finally handed his iconic shield to a friend and retired. Not everyone is done forever, thankfully, but the film showed us why all good endings are so special. They define everything that came before. According to Rotten Tomatoes, Black Panther is the best MCU film ever, and that's saying something. Black Panther did, or at least came very close to doing, what many people suggested could never happen again after 2008's The Dark Knight. It transcended the genre and became more than just another big-budget comic book movie. Instead, the film was a cultural moment all by itself. It was a topic for dinner table discussion regarding its themes of race relations, fatherhood, destiny, family expectations, and the nature of revenge and justice. If that makes it sound thematically overstuffed, it wasn't. It was done tastefully and never neglected to break up the considerable storytelling with masterful fight scenes and gorgeous Afro-futuristic world-building. And then there was the antagonist. The MCU's problems with developing memorable villains, Loki and Thanos aside, have been well documented. We certainly didn't need another CGI alien baddie hell-bent on global domination. Director Ryan Coogler, fresh off the success of reinvigorating the Rocky franchise with Creed, clearly knows a thing or two about creating engaging and complex characters. In Black Panther, he broke the MCU villain curse by giving fans not one, but two standout antagonists: the always amazing Andy Serkis as Klaue and Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger, a villain for the ages who fancied himself a liberator for oppressed black people the world over.
It's about 2 billion people all over the world that looks like us, but their lives are a lot harder. Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all.
Even T'Challa understood that while Killmonger had to be stopped, he did have a point. Sometimes necessary victories aren't glorious at all. So, writers and storytellers out there, learn from Black Panther the same lesson Coogler had going in. If you want your villain to be memorable, make them right. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite Marvel movies are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.